Hello guys, how's it going? So this is our last video from the CSS section. In this video, well by now I expect you guys to have seen the previous two parts. The first one, CSS for beginners, in which I talk about CSS, I introduce you guys to CSS and talk about a few basic features. And the second part, CSS for not so beginners, in which I talk about CSS in a little more depth and detail and talk about things like fonts and margins and paddings and a few other cool things. And in this video, we're gonna see some more advanced things. So let's get started. So first things first, let's start typing the HTML boilerplate. If you guys type in the exclamation mark in VS Code, it's going to show you guys well this first suggestion, and if you hit enter, you can see the HTML boilerplate already typed in for you, and you can just fill it in with the things that you want. For example, let's change the title to CSS Advanced. And let's also link it to our style.css. How do we do that? Link. Style sheet, href is styles, style.css. Okay, now these two are linked. We save, and so the first thing that we're going to talk about is actually pretty boring. And to some people, it's very hard to understand, which is why I put it in this advanced video. And it's called positions. Positioning in CSS is extremely important. The position property for all elements is set to static by default, and however, there are four other basically options for this property. There is a relative, there is absolute, there is fixed, and there is sticky. And however, like the sticky one is not really used as much, plus it's not really supported by all browsers, so we're going to avoid it, and we're going to wait until, well, or maybe a few years until sticky is sticked, so that we can actually start using it. However, the other three are pretty important. Starting with the first one, position relative. Well, position relative is, just like the name implies, it's relative to its first position, to its normal position. So you're gonna have to basically assume where the item would be, where that element would be if it were static, if its position were static, and then by giving it the four properties left, right, top, and bottom, you can actually change its position. And well, I have to tell you this too, that basically the reason we use positions is so that we can use these four properties, top, left, bottom, and right, and these four basically give the element the position that we want, and give it the basically move it around on the screen just like we desire. And it's all about these four positions. However, it works differently on different types of positions: relative, absolute, and fixed. So we're going to discuss how well this matters and how it makes a difference. So, well, the first one, position relative, just like we said, it's relative to its first position. But let's see this in action. The way this works is, well, let's first create a div. Let's call it, well, some div. Call it position. Let's give it an ID of position relative div. We're going to save. We're going to go to style.css and say position relative div. Give it a width of 200 pixels and height of 200 pixels. Alright, let's also give it some background color so we can actually see it. Background color, let's say aqua. Why not? Now we're going to copy the path to our css.html and put it in our browser so we can see what's going on. So this is going to be our div, and in order to test out position relative on it, we're going to go give it the position property of relative. Okay. Now let's actually reload the page and see if anything actually happened. No, nothing. And let's see. So now that we gave it position relative, we can use these four properties: top, right, bottom, and left. And using these properties, we can change its position relevant to how it actually is right now. So right now it's standing over here. If we give it left of say 200 pixels, it's going to move to the left from this position to by 200 pixels. It's going to come probably over here, exactly where it is now. And if we give it a top of 200 pixels, again, it's going to also get a distance of 200 pixels from the top. And right and bottom also work the same way. So let's try giving it a top and left. Just start with the left. Left of 200 pixels. We're going to save and reload this. And as you can see, it moved to the left by 200 pixels, and it's going to be always like this whenever we resize the page also, and it doesn't really matter where we go with this. It's always going to be to the left of the screen, and it's going to have a distance of 200 pixels from that. And if we, for example, give it a top of 200 pixels as well, and reload the page, it's also going to have a distance of 200 pixels from the top, no matter how we resize the screen. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Now you know how position relative actually works. However, position relative isn't really used by itself, and it's usually used in combination with a position absolute element inside of it. So the way it works is that well, position absolute elements they are relative to their basically position relative parent. So if we have a div that is inside of this and it has a position of absolute, it's going to get positioned by those four properties based on its parent, which is this one, who has a position relative. So meaning that if this one doesn't have a position relative, it's not going to be positioned based on this one, but rather it's going to be based on another one, the basically upper level parent. It could be like another div over here which has position relative, and if there is no other parent that has a position of relative, it's going to be positioned based on the body element, which is just the base element, right? So I know it was a lot to get in, but if we see that in action, we're actually going to understand what's going on. We're going to go back to VS Code and well, to show you guys position absolute, we're going to create another div, first outside of this position relative div. So we're going to call it, give it an ID of position absolute div, so we can make it easy to see. Copying this, save. I'm going to say position absolute div. Give it again a width of all this. Let's just copy all these three. I'm going to give it a different color though, something reddish. Get over here. Orange is fine. And what else are we going to do? We're going to give it the position of absolute and a left of 200 pixels. And this is the one. As you guys can see, it's right over here. It's gonna left of 200 pixels from the body because, well, the body is the only thing that has I mean, it doesn't have a position of relative, but it's just the last option for this element to be positioned based on. This is how position absolute actually works. The other thing about position absolute is that position absolute elements are completely ignored by other elements, no matter what they are. As you guys can see, it's just taken over. It's on top of this other element, and it doesn't actually push it around, as opposed to the position static elements. And the reason it's on top of this is because of something called z-index, which we're going to discuss later. And the more the number of z-index, the more on the top the other element. So, for example, we give this guy the position. Let's just try it out, actually. I'm going to go to inspect. We're going to select this element, the other element which has position of relative. And if we give it the z-index of, say, 2, it's going to be on top of the other one because every element has a z-index of 1 by default. And well, this position absolute was on top of the other one by default. So if we give the behind element the z-index of 2, which is bigger than the other one, it's going to be on top of it. So this is how the z-index works. And also z-index only works with items and elements who have the basically position of something other than static, namely relative, absolute, and fixed and sticky. But we're not going to talk about sticky. So they have to have a position. Okay. Cool. So this is also z-index, which we talked about. So let's actually take the position absolute div inside of the position relative div and see what's going to happen. We reload the page. You guys can see that the left is actually now based on the position relative items. So let's actually change the 200 pixels to like 100 pixels so you guys can see it better. And reload. As you guys can see, the blue one, the aqua colored div is our relative div, position relative div, and this the orange one is to basically based on the relative one, and it's positioned based on that because, for example, when we said left 100 pixels, we've given it a distance of 100 pixels from the left side, and it's going to be based on the relative parent, which is currently this one, and because this position absolute element has a parent which has the position of relative, it's positioned based on that and not the body or any other parent. And if we have another parent over here, which has the position relative, again, it's going to be based on this. So, it's pretty easy, right? So it's basically going to be always positioned based on the nearest position relative element, parent. Pretty complicated. Cool. So, and that's about it for the position absolute. And the last thing, which is pretty easy too, is the position fixed. Uh, Position fixed is quite easy, and you're going to see how. So let's just copy this div over here and call it position fixed div. We're going to save. We're going to go over here. We're going to say position fixed div. Again, we're going to give it all this width and height and background color. But instead, let's give it some other background color. Let's go about something green. Okay, green is cool for fixed. We're going to give it position fixed. Okay. And so the thing about position fixed is that position fixed also gets ignored by other items. However, it's going to be, well, just like the name implies, it's going to be fixed on the viewport. But it's not going to be based on the body or anything else. It's going to be based on the viewport. And if you guys want to know what the viewport is basically what the user is looking at the website from. If it's a mobile screen, if it's a tablet screen, if it's a computer screen, if it's going to be resized or anything. Basically, this thing that the browser screen that you're looking at the website on is the viewport. Okay, so and the position fixed, it's going to be based on the viewport. So if you give it the left of say 100 pixels, it's going to be left 100 pixels from the left side of the viewport, which is in this case this part. But in this case, it's going to be here. And if you give it the right of 200 pixels, for example, it's going to be distance the right 100 pixels from the right of this basically place. Or bottom is going to be here, and left here, top here, right? So, and the thing about position fixed is that it's always going to be here. So no matter how much you scroll down or scroll up or whatever, that element, that thing is going to always be where you define it to be. And that is how we have position fixed menus or nav bars at the top of some websites. And no matter how much you scroll, how far you scroll down on a website, it's always going to stick to the top. And this is how it works. Actually, they use position sticky for that matter as well, but we're just going to show you guys how position fixed works. So that is that. Let's say its right is going to be 100 pixels. And reload the page. And it's going to be like this. It's always going to be fixed, 100 pixels. And no matter how much you actually move the screen, it's always going to be fixed to the right side of the screen. And to give you guys a better actually view of what position fixed is capable of, I'm going to create a lot of items and basically make the screen scrollable. Position relative. I'm going to copy this. Okay, we're going to copy this like 100 times. So the only thing that is actually not ignored by the other elements, is the position relative div. So this is going to create a scrollable view for us, which means we can actually scroll on the page. And as you guys can see, when I scroll down on the page, this green position fixed element is still fixed on the screen and it's not going anywhere, which is pretty cool for some of the things that we want to do on a website. So there is that, and that's it about the positions. Cool. So now let's talk about something called transitions. So transitions are used when you want to change a CSS property very slowly and smoothly over a set period of time, like 2 seconds. For example, let's say we want to change the width of some div in 2 seconds from 200 pixels to 300 pixels or 600 pixels, whatever you want. And we want to make sure it happens little by little, like slowly, and we can actually see the transition from this state to the other state. And so let's just actually see this in action. Right now we have a div called transition div, and we're going to go ahead and give it some width and height. Let's say width 200 pixels, height also 200 pixels, and we are going to again give it a background color just so we can see how it's going to look. How about disk? I don't know what this color looks like. And let's save. Let's see how this is actually going to look. Reload the page. Yeah, there we go. That looks bisque. And let's actually go ahead and give it the transition property. Sorry, transition property. And we are going to say 2 seconds. And actually, we should tell it what kind of property we want to change before the number of seconds. Say width. And what this means is that we are going to basically work with the width, and we're going to change the width over a set period of time, and that set period of time is going to be 2 seconds, okay? And the way this works is that we usually combine this transition property with some pseudo class. For example, we're going to use hover for this one, which means that whenever you hover on this element, on this transition div element, we're going to increase the width to whatever we want. For example, we're going to say transition div hover. You remember from the previous video where I discussed the pseudo classes. This should be like a piece of cake for you. We're going to say width, say 400 pixels. Okay, and what this does is that whenever you hover on this element, it's going to change its width from what we have here, which is 200 pixels, to what we have here, which is 400 pixels. And it's going to do it very slowly in 2 seconds. Okay, we reload the page over here, and we scroll, basically hover on this. It's going to happen in 2 seconds. And when we hover out of this element, it's going to reverse that transition like this. Cool, huh? And we can actually make this faster or slower. If we make it slower, it's going to be like, let's say 4 seconds. It's going to happen in 4 seconds like a snail. I don't like this. Let's make it actually 0.5 seconds. And if we reload, it's going to happen quite fast, huh? We can actually give this multiple properties and times. Say height. Also, let's say 1 second or 2 seconds for height. And on the hover, let's say we're going to change the height to from 200 pixels to 100 pixels. Let's see what's going to happen here. Reload. And as you guys can see, its height is going to reduce, and well, the height is going to reduce much. The height is going to change much slower than the width, because we've set the time of 2 seconds per height, which is 4 times as much as the width, meaning that the width is going to change way faster, like this. See, first the width is going to change, then the height is going to reduce. We leave it again. Same thing is going to happen in the reverse order. So that's the transitions. We can do so many cool things with it, but you get the overall idea of it, right? Alright guys, so the last thing we're going to talk about is CSS animations. The way we define an animation is pretty simple. We just type in @keyframes, and then after that we put the name of the animation. We're going to call it animation 01. And over here we just write something like from curly braces to curly braces. Okay, and what this does is basically it says go from this state to this state. Okay, for example, if it already has, let's say we want to, when we reload the page, we want to change the background color of this element, which is specified using the ID animation div, from crimson to some other color. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to say background color crimson, go from this background color to background color blue violet. Okay, and let's reload the page. Oh, actually, we have to we actually have to specify for this element that it has to use the animation called animation 1, okay? And the way we do this is we say animation name colon animation 1, okay? Let's save, reload. There's actually another thing that we have to set, and that is the animation duration, because if we don't set this property, it's going to be 0 by default, meaning that the animation won't run at all. So we're going to have to set it to some seconds. For example, let's say 2 seconds. So what this does is that so far it's going to use this animation that we define over here as its animation name, and it's going to have the duration of 2 seconds, okay? So we're going to go to the browser, reload, and boom, it's going to change the color from crimson to blue violet in 2 seconds. And you might be wondering what the difference between transitions and animation actually is. And well, I'm going to tell you, the transition requires some action to perform that thing that you want to happen. For example, change it from this state to that state. But there is something that triggers that to happen. However, animation is something that's just happening without needing something to provoke it. Okay, it doesn't need any trigger. However, transitions need triggers. Okay, cool. So that's the difference between transitions and animations. And well, what else do we have in the animation area? We can do this instead of from and to. We can go ahead and use percent for this. We can say 0%, 25%, 50%, and 100%. So what this does is that at 0%, it's going to be like this. At 25%, it's going to be like this. At 50%, it's going to be like something we're going to define. And at 100%, when the animation is complete, we want this, which we're going to put here, to be achieved. Okay, meaning that it's going to go from this to this, and then from this to this, and then from this to this. So let's say at 50%, the background color is going to be something like, what do we have? Turquoise. And at 100%, the background color is going to be something else. Let's say beige, no, azure. Save and reload. And there you go. It just starts changing from crimson to blue violet to turquoise to azure, and all in 2 seconds. So that's pretty cool. There are other things that we can do with animation. For example, we can set the animation iteration count to whatever number that we want. So as you can see, by default, the animation is only going to run once. We can change this to run, for example, 3 times instead. It's going to happen 3 times now. Or we can actually set this to infinite, which causes it to run infinitely. The other thing that we can change is we can actually go ahead and say animation timing function. Why not? So what is the timing function? It actually specifies how the animation's speed is going to change from 0 to 100%. So by default, what happens is it starts very slowly, then it gets fast, and then it gets very slow at the end as well. But actually, you can actually change this to these values. Well, it's ease by default. Ease is the one which starts slow, gets fast, and then gets slow at the end as well. Ease in is the one where it just starts slow, and then the rest is whatever it was. Ease in out, it starts slow, then it gets normal, then it gets slow at the end again. Ease out, only slow at the end. And then there was others such as linear, which whose speed just doesn't change. It's linear. It's the same all the time. And that's that. We're not going to actually use that much, but it's just something that's there. There's also something else called animation direction. Oh, just before we move on, that animation timing function can also be used for transition. We can say transition timing function. It's going to do the same thing with the speed as well. Moving on, there's animation direction. We can say alternate. What animation direction does is you can actually specify if the animation is just going to keep moving forward, if it's going to be moving backward, or it's just going to do it alternately, meaning that it's going to complete one cycle, then it's going to go back, then it's going to go back again, it's going to go back. just constantly going to alternate between the two states that we have. So just to clarify, it's going to go from 0 to 100%. It's going to go from 100% to 0, and then it keeps going back and forth. So that's the alternate. The other values are alternate reverse, meaning that it's going to start from reverse and then keep alternating. And then there's the normal, which is the default. There is reverse, which just keeps going back instead of whatever. And then there is the default mode, which is normal. Yeah, cool. So we can actually set this to alternate so you guys can see how this is going to happen. Going to go from crimson, blue, violet, turquoise, azure, and then back to turquoise, blue, violet, crimson. Yeah, it's just going to keep changing between all these four colors, which is pretty cool. We can actually set this to 4 seconds so you guys can see this more clearly. This changes colors between all these four colors, and it's going to go back. It's pretty cool. And just as a little challenge, I want to see if you guys can make this div based on what you guys have learned. You can actually do this very easily. I want you guys to make this go to the right, come down, go left, and then go back up. Basically have a circular movement, but instead of circular, we just wanted to go from left to right, right to bottom, bottom to left, and left to the top, and basically just complete a cycle. And to take a little further, I want you to make it so it just keeps happening forever. And once they're further, I want you guys to actually make it so it goes back and forth, like it just does the cycle and then goes back through the cycle and then does the cycle again and then goes back through the cycle, and like so. So if you guys want to give that a try, pause the video, or you can just stick around and see the solution. Okay, I really hope you guys give this a try, but if you haven't, no worries. You can just take a look at the solution, or if you have, you can still take a look at the solution. So what happens is that we give this a position of absolute, and what we do is we just, at 0%, we set it so that the top and left are 0. It starts from here, and then at 25%, the top is 0 and left is 200 pixels, meaning that it's going to go to this position with a left of 200 pixels. Then we're going to change the top to 200 pixels, meaning that it's going to take a distance from the top, meaning it's going to go down. And at 75%, which is the position of this place, it's going to have a top of 200 pixels and is left of 0. Now you're just going to use your imagination a little bit and play around with this. And at 100%, it's just going to go back to where it was at 0%, which is top 0 and left 0. And what's really important here is that you got to set the animation iteration count to infinite so that you can see this little guy go back and forth. And also set the animation direction to alternate so that it keeps alternating between the two states of 0 to 100% and then 100% to 0 and then back and forth. And that's it with the CSS animations. Alright, that's it. With the CSS knowledge that you guys have right now, you can position elements however you like and give them beautiful animations and transitions, which are very essential for a newbie front-end developer on his or her way to becoming a professional front-end developer. Hopefully that's the goal. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.